Cheers, everyone. Let's look at a bit of history. That is as unhinged as a 14th century peasant sniffing a posy to cure the plague. But this time, it is 19th century island vibes. We are talking about the Pig War of 1859, a conflict so lacking in good judgment, it makes a medieval trial by combat look like a sensible HR meeting. It all started with a geographic 404 error. You see, the 1846 Oregon Treaty was about as clear as a medieval illuminated manuscript or a messed up group chat. Nobody knew what the treaty said. The border followed the middle of the channel, but there were two channels, the Haro Strait and the Rosario Strait. Naturally, both sides claimed the islands in the middle for years. The Americans and British lived in a state of absolute chaos, both claiming sovereignty over a few rocks and some very fluffy sheep. And then the taxman arrived in 1854. An American customs collector tried to tax the British sheep. And when they refused, he literally tried to kidnap the rams. He tied 34 breeding rams to his boat while pointing guns at the owner. It was grim. And the British responded by making the local sheep rancher a magistrate and giving him a constable with a badge. It was a Victorian standoff with more wool. Enter our main character, Lyman Cutler, an American farmer who was basically the 19th century version of a guy who ignores his HOA rules. He built his cabin right in the middle of a British sheep run. Cutler didn't bother with a proper fence because he figured the British pigs had a moral compass and would respect his potato patch. He was wrong. On June 15, 1859, Cutler saw a large black pig rooting in his garden, and in a fit of brutal rage, he shot the beast dead. That pig belonged to Charles Griffin. Griffin was an Irishman for the Hudson's Bay Company who loved that pig, possibly more than his own neighbors. Cutler offered $10 in moolah as an apology. Griffin demanded $100, which is like the price of 3 brand new iPhones today, and told Cutler to keep his potatoes out of his pig. The argument went nuclear. British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler and take him to Victoria for trial, which was a bit unhinged considering it was disputed land. So the Americans called in the cavalry. They sent Captain George Pickett, a man who finished dead last in his West Point class, and was described by some as an arrogant humbug. He arrived with 66 men. Pickett set up camp in a spot so exposed, he might as well have put a "shoot me" sign on his tent. He told his men they'd make a bunker hill out of it. The British governor, James Douglas, was a man with an unrelenting negative outlook on life, who had a major case of main character energy. He sent 3 warships to the island. By August, the Americans had 461 soldiers and 14 cannons, while the British had 5 warships and over 2,000 men. It was absolute chaos on a tiny scale. Tourists from Victoria actually took boat trips to watch the standoff because it was the most exciting thing in their grim frontier lives. It was like a Victorian Netflix for weeks. Both sides stared at each other like awkward teenagers on a first Tinder date, waiting for someone to fire the first shot. But orders were strict. Rear Admiral Robert L. Baines finally arrived and refused to throw 2 empires into war over a dead pig, calling it bizarre and foolish. He had a rare moment of good judgment. News finally reached D.C. and London, and everyone was shocked that a potato-eating swine almost started World War I. Early President James Buchanan sent a negotiator, General Winfield Scott, who was so large he had to be hoisted onto ships in a basket. Arrived to fix the messed up situation, he suggested a joint occupation for the next 12 years. The British and Americans lived on opposite ends of the island in a grim but friendly stalemate. They mostly just drank whiskey and held races. They even celebrated each other's national holidays, which is a level of sportsmanship that feels bizarre today. It was the longest drinking contest in history. Finally, in 1871, they let Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany act as an arbitrator, because apparently only a German could solve a British-American spat. He sided with the Americans. The British shrugged and left the island in 1872, but not before removing the flagpole as a final "up yours" to Uncle Sam. The Union Jack still flies at the British camp, raised daily by American park rangers because history is absolute chaos. It's a commemorative gesture for the pig. So remember, the only casualty in this war was one very hungry pig, which is a brutal end for a potato lover. Cheers to that.